At 6:12 a.m. local time in the southern Caribbean, the sun had only just risen above the horizon when a U.S. aircraft carrier moved across calm, mirror-like water, its enormous hull carving a long white trail behind it. On deck, the morning rhythm was already in motion. Flight crews worked with practiced discipline. Radar operators studied their screens in near silence. Nothing in the scene suggested immediate strain. This was a standard transit through international waters, far beyond the territorial limits of any nation and fully consistent with maritime law. Inside the carrier's Combat Information Center, everything felt controlled and deliberate. Dozens of softly glowing displays lit the dim room, tracking air, surface, and subsurface activity across hundreds of nautical miles. The carrier was not sailing alone. Destroyers and cruisers around it formed a layered defensive screen, all connected through one shared tactical picture. To an outsider, it looked like an ordinary morning at sea. To the Navy, it was simply vigilance in its purest form. Then, at 6:17, a new surface contact appeared. At first, it drew little attention. One radar returned, moving slowly and still well beyond visual range. Traffic in the Caribbean was nothing unusual. Merchant vessels, fishing boats, patrol craft. The watch officer marked it and continued, but less than a minute later, another contact appeared. Then a third, then two more. 5 surface contacts now occupied the same sector, moving on roughly the same course. That was the moment the room became noticeably quieter. The radar operator leaned in and adjusted the filters. These contacts were not spaced like ordinary civilian traffic. They were moving with purpose, keeping relative position while gradually increasing speed. Their transponders were silent. No AIS, no identifying signal, just 5 steel hulls moving through open water. Track group established, the operator reported calmly. The tactical action officer stepped closer to the main display. The distance was closing, not sharply, not yet, but steadily. The formation looked loose, almost relaxed, but to trained eyes, it was anything but random. 2 ships slightly ahead, 1 centered, and 2 trailing wider behind. That was not coincidence, that was geometry. Identification followed quickly. Venezuelan Navy vessels. Surface combatants and patrol ships, armed, rough around the edges, but very real. Their presence in international waters was not unlawful on its own. Warships have that right, but formations reveal intent, and this one did not look accidental. On the bridge, the carrier's captain received the update without changing his posture. No raised voice, no rushed commands, just acknowledgement. Foreign warships had approached U.S. carriers before, and they would again. The real question was not who they were, it was what they planned to do next. At 6:22, the Venezuelan ships altered course. The shift was slight, only a few degrees, but the result was immediate. Their projected closest point of approach began to shrink. They were no longer moving parallel. They were beginning to converge. Bridge-to-bridge radio calls were prepared under standard procedure. First in English, then in Spanish. Clear, professional, direct. No reply. The call went out again. Still nothing. Even so, there was no panic. Inside the CIC, every move was logged with precision. Bearings, speeds, timestamps. The carrier's escorts tightened their screens so subtly it was almost invisible, adjusting position without drama. Sensors moved from passive observation to heightened readiness. Not openly confrontational, not yet, but fully attentive. At this distance, no weapon systems were brought into active play. No missiles ready, no guns trained. In situations like this, U.S. Navy doctrine is straightforward. Document everything, maintain course, and avoid escalation unless there is no alternative. But 5 warships do not move this way by chance. By 6:26, the Venezuelan formation had closed enough for the pattern to be unmistakable. 2 ships pushed forward along the carrier's port side vector. 2 others spread wider, angling to shape the surrounding space. The 5th stayed farther aft, holding position and watching. This was not a strike, it was something more deliberate. Pressure. And as the range continued to narrow, one reality became impossible to ignore inside the Combat Information Center of the American carrier. This encounter was no longer routine. Whatever happened next would be recorded, studied, and remembered long after the ships finally changed course. At 6:31 a.m. local time, the geometry on the radar screen left little room for polite interpretation. What began as 5 distant surface contacts had now become a coordinated maneuver, and everyone in the CIC recognized it at the same moment. This was no longer shadowing. This was shaping the situation. The Venezuelan warships increased speed almost together. Not a dramatic burst, just enough to close the gap more quickly. Their formation tightened and the spacing shifted with the kind of discipline that comes only from practiced movement. 2 ships moved farther forward, sliding toward the carrier's projected path. The wider pair continued drifting outward, expanding the envelope. The trailing vessel remained back, its role becoming more obvious by the minute. Observe, record, and respond. On the carrier's main display, the closest point of approach numbers kept dropping. 5 nautical miles, then 4. CPA decreasing, the surface warfare coordinator reported in an even voice. Nobody needed to speak louder. Every sailor in the room understood exactly what those numbers meant. At that distance, miscalculation is no longer theoretical. Steel closes fast, and open water offers less margin than most people imagine. The carrier did not change course. It was a simple decision on paper, but one loaded with meaning. Turning away could be read as yielding to pressure. Holding steady sent a different message: confidence, discipline, control. The captain's intent was unmistakable. The United States would not alter its movements simply because another force was trying to apply pressure. International waters were not open to negotiation. On the escorting destroyers, the posture shifted in quiet ways. Helm corrections changed by fractions of a degree. Spacing tightened just enough to guarantee overlapping sensor coverage. No sharp turns, no obvious challenge. From a distance, the strike group still looked unchanged. Inside the network, it was fully alert. At 6:35, the bridge-to-bridge call went out once more. Venezuelan naval vessels operating in the vicinity. This is a United States Navy aircraft carrier conducting lawful transit in international waters. State your intentions. The message was repeated in Spanish. Silence answered back, and that silence carried its own meaning. Inside the Combat Information Center, electronic support systems began detecting low-power radar emissions from the approaching ships. Not targeting radar. Not yet. These were search and navigation sweeps, careful and measured, checking distance and relative motion. Every signal was logged, time-stamped, and catalogued. The carrier was not simply being observed, it was being evaluated. And on the flight deck above, the morning routine continued, only now with a sharper edge beneath the calm. Aircraft was secured with extra care. Deck crews moved with sharper focus, quicker hands, tighter coordination. Below deck, air wing duty officers tracked the situation closely without needing direction. They already understood where this could lead. At 6:38, the Venezuelan ships closed to within 3 nautical miles. That was the line. Inside the CIC, the tactical watch supervisor marked the shift. Under the rules of engagement, this distance demanded increased documentation and readiness. Not escalation, not confrontation, just controlled preparedness. A Seahawk helicopter was placed on alert. It stayed on deck, rotors still, no dramatic movement, but its capabilities alone, high-resolution optics, infrared imaging, precision sensors, were enough to influence the situation if needed. It was presence without provocation. The Venezuelan formation continued tightening. The 2 lead ships edged slightly ahead of the carrier's bow line, angled inward. The outer pair maintained their arcs, limiting lateral space. The trailing vessel remained steady behind, patient and watchful. It wasn't a perfect enclosure, but the intent was clear. Still, the carrier held its course. Inside the CIC, time seemed to slow. Seconds were tracked. Bearings updated. Every movement recorded. No one speculated. There was no room for that here. Only data. Only facts. At 6:41, one of the Venezuelan ships made a sharper adjustment. Small, but significant. The closest point of approach dropped again. 2 nautical miles. For the first time that morning, the atmosphere shifted. Not fear. Focus. This was no longer something that would resolve on its own. It had become a test of discipline, of control, of decision-making. And as 5 warships continued closing in on a single U.S. aircraft carrier, one truth settled over the room. What happened next wouldn't be decided by firepower, but by who made the first mistake. At 6:44 a.m., from the decks of the Venezuelan ships, the situation might have looked simple. 5 vessels compressing space around one carrier, distance shrinking, no visible reaction, no aircraft launching, no weapons brought to bear. It could easily be mistaken for hesitation. Inside the carrier's Combat Information Center, the reality was completely different. The moment the formation stabilized, the strike group's advantage became both invisible and overwhelming. Every radar sweep, every course correction, every subtle speed change was absorbed into a unified tactical picture. The carrier wasn't reacting because it didn't need to. It was listening. And in modern naval operations, awareness can be more decisive than action. Far beyond visual range, an airborne early warning aircraft tightened its orbit at altitude. From above, the entire scene sharpened into detail. What looked like simple blips on a screen now revealed patterns, speed variations, coordination, formation discipline. All of it streamed directly into the strike group's network in real time. What the Venezuelan crews couldn't see was how clearly they were being understood. Their formation revealed training levels. Their spacing reflected command discipline. Small inconsistencies hinted at who was leading and who was reacting. Even timing, how quickly each ship responded to changes, told a story about coordination and communication. Below deck, advanced systems quietly cataloged every electromagnetic signal. Navigation radar sweeps, communication bursts, sensor activity. None of it crossed into open hostility, but all of it built a detailed profile, one that wouldn't be forgotten after the encounter ended. At 6:47, the Venezuelan ships adjusted again. Two slowed slightly. The outer pair tightened inward. The trailing ship moved closer, reducing its distance. From their perspective, it may have felt like tightening control. From the carrier's perspective, it looked like pressure beginning to show. Formations under strain rarely stay perfect. Small corrections stack up, human judgment starts to surface, and that's where advantage begins to shift. The carrier stayed steady, same course, same speed. That decision forced the other ships to keep adapting, to keep revealing more with every adjustment. The longer the carrier remained unchanged, the more information it gathered. At 6:49, a subtle shift appeared. One Venezuelan ship lagged just slightly behind during a turn. Barely noticeable to the eye, but in the CIC, it stood out immediately. That delay suggested something important. Decisions were being passed along, not anticipated. A small detail, a critical one. The escorts adjusted again, quietly refining their positions. Not to challenge, not to provoke, but to maintain full awareness and freedom to act if needed. From the outside, everything still looked calm. Inside the network, nothing was unclear. The situation had reached a silent balance. No warnings, no aggressive moves. Just pressure on one side and steady control on the other. Then the calculation shifted. At 6:51, the air operations officer made a recommendation. Not escalation, not confrontation. A tool. Launch the Seahawk, not to challenge, not to intimidate, but to observe and to be clearly seen observing. The helicopter was brought to full readiness. Crew strapped in, systems powered, sensors aligned. It remained on deck, for now. And that moment changed everything. Because while attention stayed fixed on the carrier, its size, its silence, its refusal to react, the most important detail was being overlooked. The longer this continued, the more one-sided it became. The carrier wasn't boxed in, it was in control. And as the Venezuelan ships held position, unaware of how precisely they were being tracked, measured, and understood, the next move, when it came, wouldn't be loud. It would be exact. At 6:53 a.m., the Seahawk lifted off. No sudden rush, no dramatic noise meant to send a message. Just a smooth, controlled ascent into the morning air, its rotors cutting a steady rhythm over the water. For the Venezuelan crews, it was the first visible change since the situation began. And that alone made it impossible to ignore. The helicopter stayed low, just a few hundred feet above the surface, well within non-provocative limits. It didn't rush forward. It approached with intention, maintaining visibility from every bridge. Inside, the crew worked in silence. Sensors were already active. High-resolution cameras captured hull numbers, deck activity, bridge movement. Infrared systems tracked engine heat and speed changes. Every detail was recorded, time-stamped, and transmitted directly back to the carrier. This wasn't a display of force. It was a clear signal. Everything is being seen. As the Seahawk moved closer, the Venezuelan formation responded almost immediately. One ship shifted its heading, just a few degrees. Another vessel reduced speed slightly. Small adjustments, but impossible to miss. The moment an airborne sensor platform entered the picture, everything changed. From that point on, every movement would be captured, undeniable, and reviewable far beyond the Caribbean. At 6:56, the Seahawk moved into position off the forward quarter of the lead Venezuelan ship. It didn't fly overhead or make any aggressive passes. It simply held steady, matching speed while keeping a safe distance. Then a brief signal. A low-power laser designation flickered once, landing on the bridge of the nearest ship. Not a weapon, not a threat, just a clear message. We see you. Moments later, the radio call followed. Calm, measured, precise. Venezuelan naval vessels. This is a United States Navy aircraft operating in international waters. Your movements are being recorded. Maintain safe distance and alter course to avoid escalation. The message was repeated in Spanish. For a few seconds, nothing changed. Then the formation began to loosen. The outer ships widened their spacing. One of the forward vessels reduced speed by a couple of knots. Wake patterns shifted. The tight structure that had defined the encounter for nearly 30 minutes started to break apart. Inside the CIC, there was no reaction, just observation. The data confirmed what the eye could already see. Closest point of approach stabilized, then slowly began to increase. The pressure was fading. Around 700, one Venezuelan ship made a clear turn away from the carrier's path. Not sudden, not chaotic, controlled and deliberate. The others followed one by one. No alarms, no escalation, no sudden moves. The carrier never adjusted course or speed. It didn't have to. The situation was resolving on its own. The Seahawk stayed in position just long enough to confirm the shift. Its sensors captured everything from multiple angles. Ships turning away, deck crews stepping back, activity settling. Brief radio chatter appeared, internal only. No threatening signals showed up across the spectrum. Then, just as quietly as it arrived, the helicopter peeled away, climbing, banking, and heading back toward the carrier. Mission complete. By 7:04, the 5 Venezuelan ships were no longer closing in. The distance increased minute by minute. What began as a coordinated approach ended as a controlled withdrawal. From the outside, it might have looked uneventful. No dramatic visuals, no loud confrontation, nothing that would dominate headlines. But for those who understand naval operations, the message was clear. 5 warships moved in quickly on a U.S. aircraft carrier. The carrier never flinched. And in the end, it was calm, discipline, and precise documentation that shaped the outcome. Because in modern naval encounters, the side that stays composed doesn't just avoid conflict, it controls it. By 7:10 a.m., the Caribbean looked ordinary again. The Venezuelan ships were still visible on radar, but no longer influencing the situation. Their courses diverged, speeds normalized. What had been a coordinated maneuver less than an hour earlier now looked like routine maritime traffic drifting away from a strike group that never changed direction. On the surface, nothing dramatic had happened, and that was exactly the point. Inside the CIC, the entire encounter was already being archived. Every radar sweep, every course correction, every signal and maneuver had been recorded, synchronized, and preserved. The Seahawks footage was cataloged frame by frame, timestamps, bearings, infrared overlays. This wasn't just documentation, it was leverage. From a strategic standpoint, the outcome was decisive, without noise, without escalation. No shots fired, no ultimatums issued, no deviation from standard procedures. And still, the result spoke for itself. 5 warships attempted to apply pressure, and that pressure collapsed. Why? Because modern naval power isn't defined only by firepower. It's defined by control, of information, of timing, and of decision-making space. Throughout the entire encounter, the carrier strike group controlled all 3. By holding course, the carrier denied any sense of psychological advantage. By staying disciplined and measured, it forced the opposing ships to keep adjusting, revealing more with every move. Each correction narrowed their options and expanded the carrier's understanding of them. The Seahawk wasn't sent to intimidate. It was a calculated, lawful step designed to remove ambiguity. Once everything was visible and recorded, the choice became simple: continue and risk an incident fully documented in detail, or step away. They chose to step away, and that decision matters far beyond that moment. Encounters like this don't exist in isolation. They build patterns. They shape expectations. They influence future decisions. What was demonstrated that morning was not just a test, it was a response. A willingness to probe on one side, and on the other, the ability to absorb pressure without losing control. This is what's often called gray zone conflict. No open confrontation, no formal declarations, just calculated moves designed to test limits and gain advantage. In that space, restraint isn't weakness, it's a tool, and it only works when backed by capability and confidence. For the crew aboard the carrier, the day moved on. Shifts rotated, aircraft operations resumed, meals were served. The event became another entry in the log. But at higher levels, planners, analysts, decision makers, the implications were already being studied. The Caribbean, like many regions today, remains a space where perception and proximity matter. Every close approach carries weight. Every maneuver sends a message. And the message that morning was simple. If you move in to apply pressure, you need to be ready for what that pressure reveals. Because when one side stays calm, stays within the rules, and keeps everything recorded, escalation stops being an advantage. It becomes a risk. And that's the irony. 5 warships moved in expecting to shape the moment. Instead, the moment shaped them. So here's the question that remains after the ships separate and the screens go quiet. Should the United States respond more forcefully in situations like this, or is disciplined restraint actually the stronger move? Let me know what you think in the comments.